think back about the last few times in which like you were very stressed. So, and then think back about what were some of like the potential triggers for those isolated like incidents whereby you're stressed, to see if like you can kind of like find a pattern, so that you can kind of like do forecasting. That means that you will prepare yourself for the future. So if let's say I see that my schedule in the future is going to be packed, and this is one thing that I know stresses me out, then I could do something about it. Or if like my next project is very ambiguous, I'm really not too sure what I'm supposed to be doing, and I know that that is what stresses me out, then I can do some like active, maybe like problem solving, to be able to like talk to my supervisor and establish a little bit more structure to help me become less stressed when the project starts itself. So I think it's a process of like a lot of like self-awareness, self-reflection about the past times that we are stressed, and when we are stressed, what's exactly happening within us that are like personal triggers that makes us feel stressed.
Welcome back to the Careers of Millennials podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about mental health. And right here in our midst, we have a therapist. Sophia Goh is a professional counselor and therapist based in Singapore. She is passionate about helping teenagers and young adults flourish and live out their best selves. She started out as a counselor trainee at National Institute of Education in NTU and completed a master's in guidance and counseling. Then she provided counseling in a primary and secondary school before starting her private practice, Sophia Wellness Clinic, in 2017. Previously, she also did a degree in business and finance at SMU. Sophia, thank you so much for joining me in this podcast where we can discuss the mental health of millennials.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here.
Sophia, why don't we start off by sharing a little bit about yourself before we get into some of the questions that I've prepared for you?
Yeah, sure. So I think you did a very good introduction of me already just now. So I think maybe a couple more things to add on to that. What you have already shared would be that I work with teenagers and young adults on various mental health challenges, such as anxiety, depression, stress, and anger management. So another part that I really love to work with is also in terms of like modern day challenges that a lot of us, maybe even like you and me, are facing. So in terms of like high internal expectations, or maybe like transitioning to a new life stage, maybe from graduating from studying to the work life, or maybe moving from married life to having kids and having to kind of like juggle that balance of work, personal life, and family as well. So I really like to help people with this kind of like modern day challenges, which are some of those challenges that actually you or me might face as well.
Okay, I know that all of us would encounter problems in life, work, and relationships, as you just mentioned. We deal with anxiety, we deal with high expectations people have on ourselves and our own expectations on ourselves. And some of these problems could take a toll on our mental health, right? So then how do we know if we actually need more help than we could actually help ourselves?
Right. So I think as a counselor and psychotherapist, I would say that you are always welcome to seek help at any point. So like perhaps like even if like you are struggling with like a decision that you want someone that you want to be able to talk to someone to. So like we are very open to you coming in to be able to talk about it. So I think to answer that, we are open at any point in which like you're struggling to be able to come in. There isn't a fixed point whereby a lot of people feel that it has to be bad enough, then you have to come in to talk to someone. So for us or for me, I don't feel that there is such point. I feel that as long as you want to be able to talk to someone, you can do so. So I think maybe in terms of like if, let's say, daily functioning is affected. So for example, if like sleep, appetite, maybe your mood is affected for a prolonged period of time, and this is perhaps like much longer than what you would usually go through if you're facing a setback or a challenge, then perhaps it's a good indicator that, maybe you just want to like reach out to someone for help. It doesn't really have to mean that you need to go and seek professional help, but it could also just suggest that maybe you should talk to your friends, talk to your family, or even talk to your colleagues about some of the challenges that you're facing.
Okay, great. So for people who know that they need help and they know that they need to talk to someone and they are really facing problems sleeping and having anxiety issues more than the usual, but then they decide, they say, professional counseling therapy is not really for me. I don't really know what it is. I don't want my friends or my family members to know that I'm seeing a therapist, and all sorts of variety of reasons. What would you say to these people?
Mm, mm. So I think that's quite a common concern that we hear from even people who have already come in to seek help. So they do bring up some of these concerns, such as is there like a particular type of like stigma? They don't really want people to know that they're coming in to seek help. So I think it has to do a lot with the misconception that you have to have particular mental health conditions or mental disorders for you to be able to seek help. Or if you do seek help, that means that you do have these conditions. So a lot of the times when people come in, they will ask us questions like, also, do you think I have this? Do you think I have this? So I think to address like these misconceptions, you don't actually have to have any like mental health disorders or mental health conditions to be able to seek help. If you just feel that you're struggling and you need someone to be able to talk to, you can come in to talk to us. So that is like something that you're perfectly welcome to do. But I guess a lot of people have like misconceptions about talking to someone that is maybe like not their friends, maybe not their family members, and someone who is professionally trained. So there's always this stigma or this belief that it means that there is something wrong with them. So that's actually quite a common conception. But I think what I just want to say that it doesn't mean that it has to be bad enough.
I understand. So anyone can approach a counselor, even though they don't necessarily have a mental condition or mental disorder. It can be of any variety sorts of anxiety issues that they basically just want to have someone to talk to. It can be just really as simple as that.
Yeah, you're right.
So what are your thoughts on the mental health of millennials, especially that you see around you? Because there are mostly in the age group of 18 to 34 years old, and life gets in the way. They have to go to university. They have to find a job, and this year has been especially tough, right? So, what are your observations of the mental health of millennials around you, especially?
Mm. So I think that the statistics for this particular age group in terms of like mental health, it's quite alarming. Because in Singapore, for this particular age group, 18 to 24, we are identified as the most vulnerable group for mental health issues. So it's one in five individuals from age 18 to 34 will experience some form of mental health issues as compared to 1 in 7 in the general population. So I think like we are the most vulnerable age group for like a lot of like reasons that you have mentioned as well, which is that there are quite a lot of like life challenges that us in this age group have to go through. And I also think that I think we are very technologically connected. So that itself brings a host of like different challenges. I think it just amplifies the entire social comparison. So last time when you wanted to compare how you're doing with somebody else, it's usually through the grapevine. You have to like listen, you have to like hear what your neighbors are talking about how somebody else is doing. But now, as an individual, you can compare yourself to like a celebrity or compare yourself to like a CEO of a big company to kind of like figure out how assess how you're doing. So I think the comparison itself is magnified. So we have a lot of like expectations, very high internal expectations of ourselves that may or may not be realistic. If we are talking about like comparing to like 10 different people with 10 different skill sets and they are like excelling at different things. So that's really a very tough shoes for us to live to fill. So that's incredibly stressful. I think also modern day, there is also like a lot of expectations for us to excel in like different domains. So for me, I'm a mom, so I have like career, I have work, I have like family. So like there's like a lot of expectations for us like to do well in all of these areas. When you see on Instagram, there are like people who are like doing it perfectly in terms of like being a mom, in terms of like in their career as well. So it's incredibly stressful for us in this age group with like all the different like technology, being so technologically connected.
I hear you.
And I'm not too sure whether you feel some of this like pressures, um, whether you experience or you do feel some of these pressures as well.
Yeah, definitely. You know, when I look online, I think there's always a pros and cons when we look at social media and we look at the internet. The upside definitely is you see a better version. You could see a better version of yourself. They inspire you to be better, and you want to be like them. At the same time, if you don't meet some of those personal goals that you set for yourself, then you would be feeling in despair because you're comparing yourself with them. So I think the mindset or the way we view social media and the internet celebrities we see online matter a lot. So if we look at them as like a from a growth mindset perspective, meaning I want to be better, I want to grow, then that's great. But if we look at it from a fixed mindset perspective, that I'm just like this today and I'll never become like them, then definitely that is very depressing to know. So I think it's really the way we perceive it. Social media and the internet is not going to go away. It's going to be here for the next few decades. So I think the way we need to adapt to it is to change the way we perceive social media, and thus be able to consume it in a healthy way, if that makes sense.
Right, to establish like a healthy relationship with like our social media usage.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So Sophia, since you're a therapist and you give a lot of tips to your clients, would you be able to share with us and our audience what are some of the really quick and easy ways that we can improve our mental health?
Mm. So I think that's a question that a lot of people come in with, which is that, you know, they want their problems to be solved as fast as possible. But unfortunately, I think there are no quick and easy tips to kind of like improve your mental health. Even if like some of those tips, it takes quite a bit of effort to be able to kind of like implement and make it work as well. So for example, I would say like the most basic would be your fundamentals. So your fundamentals would be how well you're eating, how well you're sleeping, and then also exercising. So it seems like they are like quick, easy tips, but to be able to implement them, it also takes a lot of like conscientious effort for you to plan workouts, for you to plan what you're eating, and for you to kind of like set boundaries to make sure that you are getting adequate rest and adequate sleep as well. So this would be the fundamentals that I would always explore when somebody comes in with like any types of like challenges. I would try and see if their fundamentals they are doing well in terms of their fundamentals. So that is one. Other things that possibly I might share would be some of those common things that I find that people don't really know. So that's like chronic stress. So I think for this particular age group, millennials, I think we deal with a lot of like chronic stress just because of how incredibly stressful our life is. So we have to cope with challenges at work and in the family. So one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that so um, even so there's one thing about it being a stressor. So that means like the stressor is the event or the incident that stresses you out. So even if like it's over already, the stress itself is still something that lingers in our body. And I think that is something that a lot of people we don't realize. So we just think that okay, we just focus on solving like all the problems at work, all the problems in the family, and then my stress will go away. But it's not true. There are different things. So as long as like we experience a stressor and then our body experiences stress, stress itself is something that we need to deal with to prevent it from kind of like just building all the way up, and then like we will have like the impacts of like chronic stress, so such as like burnout, higher rates of like heart disease, cholesterol, etc. So we definitely need to find ways to release the stress in our day-to-day lives as well, despite whether or not we have like resolved the stresses that we are facing in our life. So I think that's something that a lot of us we don't realize that we need to actively be able to deal and manage our stress in our day-to-day lives. Especially as a millennial, I think it's like incredibly stressful, like incredible amount of things that we do in a day-to-day.
Okay, Sophia, I'm curious to understand how can we become more aware of our mental health, because you mentioned that we need to realize that stress is building up in us and realize it sooner than later, because prevention is better than cure. We want to make sure that the stress doesn't build up beyond a certain point that that it harms our mental health, right? So, what are some tips that you would give around building self-awareness of our own mental health?
Mm, right. So, what we would do would be to kind of like work together to be able to figure out what are some of your personal triggers for stress. So, for like some people, I'm not too sure whether you would be able to identify with any of it, but for some people, it's perhaps like overwhelm and workload that stresses them out. For some people, it might be the uncertainty. So, like not knowing exactly what you're being tasked to do. So, that stresses them out. So, I think, so what I would do is that I do have a list of like potential personal triggers. And then it's a good idea to kind of like sit down together, or even if like, even like maybe for you as an individual to kind of like think back about the last few times in which like you were very stressed. So, and then think back about what were some of like the potential triggers for those isolated like incidents whereby you're stressed, to see if like you can kind of like find a pattern so that you can kind of like do forecasting. That means like you will prepare yourself for the future. So if let's say I see that my schedule in the future is going to be packed, and this is one thing that I know stresses me out, then I could do something about it. Or if like my next project is very ambiguous, I'm really not too sure what I'm supposed to be doing, and I know that that is what stresses me out, then I can do some like active, maybe like problem solving, to be able to like talk to my supervisor and establish a little bit more structure to help me become less stressed when the project starts itself. So I think it's a process of like a lot of like self-awareness, self-reflection about the past times that we are stressed, and when we are stressed, what's exactly happening within us that are like personal triggers that makes us feel stress.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that we basically use the power of reflection and look at the past and just sit down and think about how what about the stressful events that we had in the past, and identify what was the trigger, right? As you mentioned, what was the main event that we feel stressed about. It can be uncertainty, or it can be feeling overwhelmed, and use those tips to look forward into the future and say, okay, if these things are coming up, then I know that I'm going to be in for a rough ride. So by basically being prepared and being aware of these stresses, we can be more prepared for the future challenges.
Mm. Mm.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. So, Sophia, when people come for therapy sessions, right? I understand that they would often be asked how they are feeling, what is their mental well-being from a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst state and 10 being the best of state. And if someone comes along and say, okay, I'm giving myself a 2 or 3 because I don't feel good. I feel super overwhelmed. I feel super stressed. How would you help them to get it to a 10?
Mm. Mm. Right. So I think at the first point of contact, so we call it like what you have mentioned, like the presenting concerns. So the reasons or the concerns that clients are coming in to seek help for in counseling. So like that's one part of it. So when clients come in, what we would do is to spend like a few sessions to do quite a comprehensive assessment of what is happening for them. So we want to be able to figure out, we want to be able to hear their life histories, relationship history, family history, because like even though let's say we're talking about stress, we want to find out what exactly is something that is happening for them, because the way that you are stressed might be different from the way that somebody else is stressed. So if we just deal with the stress itself, then we might not be able to deal with some of like the root causes. So for example, maybe the root cause is that I really struggle with personal relationships. That's why whenever conflicts happen, I'm stressed. Or I really struggle with uncertainty. That's why I'm stressed. So we want to be able to like piece out what's the underlying root cause first before kind of like planning an intervention, planning an treatment plan to be able to work on it. So I would say that even though like different clients come in with like maybe common concerns, maybe it could be stress, it could be anxiety, the treatment plan that comes following might look quite different based on where our assessment goes.
That's really interesting. So it sounds like there's really a lot of planning and thinking that goes behind the scenes. You basically get people to talk about their life and talk about their work and their relationships, and then from there you try to identify what are the stresses that is potentially causing the problem that they're facing today. And then from there you devise an intervention plan to help them cope with these stresses. So it's really interesting that that this is what people can get when they go for a therapy session. Someone might come along and say, hey, when you go to a therapist, you're actually just talking to someone, and you can actually do the same also with a friend. But from your point of view, what do you think is why do you think what do you think is the difference between just talking to a friend, and what what extra effectiveness can one see when they come and see a professional therapist?
I think there is like quite a lot of like common. I think it's quite a common thing to hear that, oh, it's just talking. I could just like talk to a friend or family member as well. It seems like it's the same. So maybe I would think perhaps the misconception comes from how similar just talking is in the first few assessment sessions. So in the first few assessment sessions, it may seem that I'm just like having a conversation with someone without actively working on the problems. However, if you think about it, so it's kind of like without those assessment sessions, without those like really like getting to know you through like just talking and having conversations, it's kind of like you going to the doctor and then the doctor just prescribes Panadol to anybody who comes in the door. So we kind of like don't really want to do that. We want to really be able to like get to know you very well first. which is why there is this like impression that, it just like counseling is just like talking. She's just like asking me about how my day was, how my life is, and things like that. But that's a very important part of the process. That's the assessment part, whereby it really informs us what is happening in what is happening for you in your life. And I think even so, some people do experience benefits of it. So from like just talking about things, they do come to their own like insights and awareness about themselves. Because the talking is not so much also for me, but it's also sometimes like being able to put some of those things that you are thinking about in words. It already helps some people make sense of what they are struggling and what they are going through. So it itself is a way of helping people to come to their own understanding of what's happening for them. And sometimes it really just talking just really helps them to be able to resolve their problems. So they know what to do after that without any perhaps like input from me.
Okay, and then what happens in the later sessions that really makes the difference between talking to a friend, right? Because from a professional standpoint, what is the work that goes behind the scene when you plan out an intervention plan or a treatment plan that can actually make a bigger difference than just a friend merely talking to you?
So when we move on to like, so after the first few sessions, so what we would usually do is that I would share with you, okay, so I think this is what's happening, and here's the treatment plan that I've proposed, and then what do you think? So if we are both kind of like in agreement, we do like kind of like think that, okay, yeah, we do see eye to eye on that, then we'll proceed with the treatment plan. So I think the treatment plan could be quite varied depending on what the presenting concerns and the issues are. So it could involve like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, whereby we spend sessions helping you to examine your thoughts, because there is an association between the way that how you think and how you feel. So, for example, if let's say you got fired, you got fired from your job, so you lost your job. So someone might think that, oh, okay, so it's because the economy is bad. Then they might feel sad, but then they would look for another job. And maybe, so they will look for another job. But if somebody thinks that, okay, so it's because I'm lousy and I would never be able to do well in any job, then they would feel sad, maybe even depressed, and then they would just stay in that state because they don't believe that they could look for another job. So the way that we think in similar situations would lead to very different feelings and very different actions. So we might want to help people to be able to kind of like examine what are their thoughts, examine like what are their core beliefs that are under these thoughts. So some people would have like a worldview that I'm just no good. So the way that they see things in different situations all centers around that. So we might want to like find some ways to be able to challenge that or change that to a more adaptive core belief, so that it helps them to move forward in the different challenges that are facing. So I think the intervention part, we actually do quite a lot of like solid work in that sense, whereby it's really a lot of like back and forth between the client and the therapist. So I think quite a lot happens in the treatment plan, in the treatment part.
Thank you, Sophia, for giving us an overview of what to expect from the first session all the way to the treatment. So I think what you shared is definitely very powerful, because how we think would affect how we feel, and I personally believe in that too. So if we can intervene that by injecting positive thoughts and blocking out or discarding negative thoughts, then it can also make us feel from bad to good or bad to better. I mean, from good to better. Yeah. Okay, so Sophia, I just have one more question. Just curious about it, because just now you mentioned you drew the comparison of going to a doctor and basically getting some drugs to cure a flu, for example. So I'm just trying to understand, why do you think physical health problems can be resolved easily, right? You have a flu, you take a drug, in a few days' time, you're fine. But mental health, on the other hand, it takes days, more than just days. It takes longer than physical health um, problems to go away. Why do you think it takes a longer period of time for mental health conditions to improve?
Mm. Mm. I was wondering if perhaps if it's like physical sickness, maybe there are some like indicators. So it's maybe so for like certain conditions you can diagnose or you can tell very clearly, okay, so this is exactly what's happening for you because maybe from your blood test it shows that particular results. So therefore, like there is like a drug or there is like a treatment that you can do to improve that. But for actually for a lot of like mental health issues, so we talk about like mental health doesn't exist in isolation. So it actually we consider like biopsychosocial. So how your body is feeling, your psychological state, and maybe the social aspects of what you're experiencing, such as like your friendships, how your family. So all of these factors have like an influence or have a part to play in your mental health. So it makes it very difficult or even a little bit more complicated to be able to kind of like pinpoint directly what exactly is happening in your life that is causing certain issues. Or even it might be like a combination of different factors as well that is kind of like affecting your mental health. So I think it's kind of like, for one, it's the difficulty in exactly pinpointing because there is no test that you take that tells you that, okay, so this is like depression or like this is like anxiety because of like family relationships, etc. There's no one test, so it's very hard to tell. The second part is that maybe it's because it's like influenced by so many different factors. It really doesn't happen in isolation. We always take a look at like the biopsychosocial. Um, so it's quite complex to be able to kind of like work on improving your mental health.
So in sum, since mental health can be very difficult to diagnose or even treat, we should all take care of our mental health using the tips that you just shared. And if we do need help, we need to seek help early, right? Because it's a complex problem that takes a long time to resolve, and we wouldn't want to put ourselves through any longer kind of agony or pain. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sophia, so much for joining and sharing with us your sharing with us some tips about mental health and what is the process around resolving mental health issues with therapy. So thank you, Sophia, for joining us, and I look forward to talk to you again.